1975. Chile has been under a brutal military dictatorship for 2 years. Thousands of people have been killed, imprisoned, or disappeared. And a group of young economists, trained at the University of Chicago, is redesigning the country's economy from scratch. Massive privatization. Elimination of tariffs. Financial deregulation. Cuts in public spending. It is the most radical monetarist experiment in history. And it is carried out under a regime that tortures its opponents. Milton Friedman, the man whose ideas inspire the experiment, will win the Nobel Prize in Economics the following year. His defenders will say that ideas are independent of the regime that applies them. His critics will say you cannot separate one from the other. Today we are not going to settle that debate. We are going to understand the ideas. Because Friedman's ideas, regardless of how they were applied, changed the economics of the 20th century. Keynes dominated economics from the 30s to the 70s. His message was clear: aggregate demand matters, the government must intervene to stabilize the economy, the market does not self-regulate. Then came the stagflation of the 70s. Double-digit inflation and high unemployment at the same time. Keynesianism did not have a good explanation. Milton Friedman did. Friedman was born in 1912 in Brooklyn, the son of Hungarian immigrants. He studied at Rutgers, Chicago, and Columbia. He was small, energetic, enormously persuasive, and brutally direct. His central idea was simple and powerful: inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. If there is inflation, it is because there is too much money in circulation. If there is too much money in circulation, it is because the central bank has allowed it. The solution, according to Friedman, is not for the government to manage demand. It is for the central bank to control the quantity of money. Make it grow at a stable and predictable rate, aligned with real economic growth. No discretionary adjustments. No trying to stimulate the economy in every recession. Clear and automatic rules. To support this idea, Friedman and Anna Schwartz wrote one of the most influential economics books of the 20th century, A Monetary History of the United States, published in 1963. Their thesis was bombastic: the Great Depression was not caused by a market failure. It was caused by a central bank failure. According to Friedman, the Federal Reserve contracted the money supply at the worst possible moment. Instead of injecting money to compensate for the fall in demand, it let banks fail and the quantity of money collapse. What could have been an ordinary recession became the worst economic catastrophe in modern history. It is a powerful argument. And it has substantial empirical support. But it is not the only argument. Keynesians note that monetary policy has limits, especially when interest rates reach zero. And institutionalists argue that deficient banking regulation was as important as monetary policy. Friedman's second big idea struck directly at the heart of Keynesianism, the Phillips curve. Keynesians had observed an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. When inflation rises, unemployment falls, and vice versa. Governments could choose their preferred combination: a bit more inflation in exchange for less unemployment, or the other way around. Friedman said that only works in the short run. And that in the long run it is a dangerous illusion. His argument: there exists a natural rate of unemployment that depends on structural factors, such as worker qualifications, labor market flexibility, and available technology. If the government tries to push unemployment below that natural rate using stimulus, all it will achieve is inflation. Because workers and businesses will adjust their expectations. Imagine the government prints money to stimulate the economy. At first, businesses see more sales and hire more. But soon prices rise. Workers demand higher wages. Costs rise. And employment returns to its natural level, but now with higher inflation. If the government tries to stimulate again, it gets even more inflation without reducing unemployment. It is the inflationary spiral. And it is exactly what happened in the 70s. The natural rate of unemployment is one of the most influential ideas of the second half of the 20th century. But it is not without problems. It is difficult to measure precisely. And the idea that a certain level of unemployment is inevitable and should not be fought has enormous social implications. Friedman also challenged Keynes on a more technical but equally important front. The Keynesian consumption function says that when people receive more money, they spend a fixed proportion of that additional income. Friedman argued that people do not consume based on this month's income. They consume based on what they expect to earn over their lifetime. It is the permanent income hypothesis. If you get an unexpected bonus, you do not spend it all at once. You spread it over time, because you know it is a one-off. And if your salary temporarily drops, you do not cut spending by the same proportion, because you expect the situation to normalize. The policy implication is that temporary fiscal stimuli do not work as well as Keynesians think. If the government sends a one-time check to every citizen, people will save much of it because they know it will not be repeated. For consumption to truly increase, the perception of long-term income has to change. You cannot talk about Friedman without talking about Chile. Not because it was the only place his ideas were applied, but because it was the most extreme laboratory. After the military coup of 1973 against the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende, a group of Chilean economists trained at the University of Chicago, known as the Chicago Boys, implemented a radical economic transformation. The results were, to say the least, mixed. On the positive side, after a brutal decade, Chile experienced a period of sustained economic growth. Inflation, which had reached extreme levels under Allende, was brought under control. Chile integrated into the world economy. On the negative side, inequality soared. Social cuts devastated the working classes. Financial deregulation caused a serious banking crisis in 1982. And all of this took place under a dictatorship that murdered thousands of people. Friedman visited Chile in 1975 and met with Pinochet. He always argued he was promoting economic freedom, which would eventually lead to political freedom. His critics responded that lending intellectual legitimacy to a dictatorship has nothing to do with liberalism. The Chilean case demonstrates something important: economic ideas do not exist in a vacuum. They are applied in specific political contexts. And judging a policy solely by its economic results, ignoring the context in which it was implemented, is intellectually incomplete. Friedman's ideas did not stay in Chile. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher came to power in Great Britain. In 1981, Ronald Reagan in the United States. Both adopted monetarist and neoliberal-inspired policies. They raised interest rates to control inflation, even though it meant deep recessions. They privatized public enterprises. They deregulated financial markets. They cut taxes on the wealthy, arguing that wealth would trickle down. Inflation was controlled. And growth returned, eventually. But the cost was high. Entire industrial communities in northern England were devastated. Inequality soared in both countries. Unions were systematically weakened. John Kenneth Galbraith, the Harvard economist and one of Friedman's sharpest critics, described trickle-down theory this way: the idea that if you feed the horse enough oats, some will eventually pass through to the road for the sparrows. Pure monetarism, as Friedman formulated it, did not survive contact with reality. Central banks discovered that controlling the quantity of money is much harder than Friedman believed. The relationship between the quantity of money and prices is not stable. And when central banks tried to set automatic monetary rules in the 80s, the results were disappointing. Today, no major central bank follows a strict monetarist rule. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan manage the economy with an eclectic combination of tools that includes Keynesian, monetarist, and other ideas. The second criticism is that Friedman tended to underestimate market failures. His confidence that deregulation always improves outcomes crashed into the financial crisis of 2008, which was in large part a consequence of the financial deregulation he had promoted. And the third is the tension between economic freedom and political freedom. Friedman argued they were inseparable. But Chile proved you can have free markets without political freedom. And the Nordic countries prove you can have large states with robust civil liberties. But Friedman's contributions are real. His analysis of the Great Depression changed our understanding of economic history. The natural rate of unemployment forced Keynesians to improve their models. And his insistence that inflation is a monetary phenomenon remains, in its moderate form, the consensus. Economic ideas have human consequences. When Thatcher closed the mines of northern England, she was not solving an equation. She was destroying communities that had lived from mining for generations. When the Chicago Boys privatized pensions in Chile, millions of people were left at the mercy of financial markets. Friedman would say those decisions were necessary for long-term growth. His critics would say that growth which primarily benefits the already wealthy is not progress. Economics is not just numbers. It is people. And the people who pay the cost of economic policies are rarely the ones who design them. 3 ideas to take away from this episode. First, Friedman argued that inflation is always a monetary phenomenon and that the Great Depression was caused by the Federal Reserve, not the market. His monetary analysis was an enormous contribution, though strict monetarism did not survive contact with practice. Second, the natural rate of unemployment challenged the Keynesian Phillips curve and showed that permanent employment cannot be bought with inflation. But it also implies accepting a level of unemployment as inevitable, which is socially costly. Third, Friedman's ideas were applied in Chile, Great Britain, and the United States with results that include both inflation control and growth as well as rising inequality, the destruction of communities, and deep social costs. Ideas cannot be judged apart from the context in which they are applied. Keynesians said demand matters. Monetarists said money matters. But a group of economists had been asking a different question for decades: what about the rules of the game? It was not just about how much the government spends or how much money the central bank prints. It was about institutions, the laws, norms, and customs that determine whether an economy works or fails. An eccentric Chicago professor studied conspicuous consumption. An economic historian from St. Louis proved that institutions explain the wealth of nations. And a political scientist from Indiana proved that communities can manage common resources without needing either state or market. That, next time.